Hi, this is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thank you for taking a little time to listen in on this IPA Talk podcast version. And with me on the phone is our State Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Tony Smith. Tony, as always, appreciate you breaking away from the hecticness of your schedule to just spend some time with me and catching folks up out there in the field with the variety of things that you've got going on. So welcome.
Thank you, Jason. It's always a pleasure.
So, when I had submitted a couple of things for us maybe to talk about here this morning, and just for a reference sake, the date for today's podcast is the 26th of February. Talked about the budget, ESSA assessments and such, and we'll get into that in just a bit. But what has happened since then is the tragedy in Parkland at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where we lost several kids and adults there. Obviously, our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to those individuals as they continue to process that, and I believe are actually heading back to school today in the aftermath of that. But obviously, Tony, this is a good reminder for us of things that we need to be thinking about with regards to keeping schools safe, as well as, in this instance, making sure that we're giving kids an opportunity to express themselves appropriately and make sure that they're sharing their feelings about things. So a little bit to unpack there, but thought I'd just let you share any just overarching thoughts that you have about the situation.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and the organizing that students and families have done, though, is, for me, where there's hope and the opportunity to learn and grow and take some, I think, new steps, a different direction to really end these terrible situations of violence. I think the opportunity we've got is to really stay focused on what schools in our communities are. They're places of belonging, connection, a chance to grow and learn together. And so even as we have these hard conversations, I think we have to remember, first, foremost, and always, places of belonging and places of connection that our schools need to be. And so when I hear people talk about all the other ways of making hard targets and everything else, I think our job as educators is to stay focused on, hey, we need to make sure we have the resources to give our children and families and educators what they need to fully meet the needs of all of our kids. And even in those situations where we, discipline, whatever, it's always, in a way that builds a young person's humanity and deepens their connection, right? And so if we're feeling like we're losing some of our kids, we got to reach out even harder. And I think the opportunity we've got is to think even more deeply about what schools need to be, the way we build relationships, and of course, keeping our kids safe and being present in our buildings. We need more adults in our buildings. We need, as administrators, walk it, feel it, like make sure the place is the way it needs to be. And, the other piece, honestly, is about community outreach. And, the more you see something, you got to say something, and everybody is a part of that. And I just think it's obviously weighs on all of us, and but I do think this moment of young people stepping up and sharing their thinking and their voices and across the country. So we'll, as a state agency, be putting guidance out starting March 1st about the national walkout and different ways to support and work with young people and families in each of our communities. I think we really need to get in deeper dialogue with our kids, and this is a moment of strong leadership for them, and we need to join with them and learn what's on their minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I would say, just to accentuate a couple of points there, Tony, with regards to the walkouts, our national affiliate, the National Association of Secondary School Principals, has already put out some information from their perspective, and also with regards to this podcast, we'll be sure to highlight and link to any of the information that you guys are sharing out at the state board, just so people are fully informed. But for our school leaders out there and dealing with these types of conversations and working with kids in these emotional moments, I think it's really important for them to make sure that they're not overreacting, and that they're really working with students, right? I think if kids are treated respectfully and worked with in a reasonable way, I think there's opportunities to make sure that their voices can be heard and they kids can feel the freedom to speak, but do it within the parameters of a safe educational environment, right? I believe that's what education's about, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the ability to, what one great principal that I worked with used to say is that got to be a lighthouse. That we're what keeps them. They're going all over the place. They're figuring out who they are. This is a middle school principal. They're kind of bouncing around. So we got to be the lighthouse. We don't bounce around with them. We keep the light shining where we're headed. And I think this ability to listen, to be in relationship, but keep kids safe is really important. I totally agree with you.
And I got to tell you, it's pretty important to be listening to middle school principals, because with 2 middle school children in my own household right now, those kids are full of emotions all the time. So right, exactly. Just working with them is a special talent and skill. I did want to, and this will accentuate a couple of things that you said just a moment ago, Tony, with regards to keeping schools safe. I was sharing with you before we started recording here that I had a phone call last week with Dr. David Turner, who's one of my predecessors here at IPA, and he worked with a lot of school leaders in his position here as executive director after the Columbine incident, back in 1999, I believe, and did a lot of training and worked with law enforcement officials and others with that. And he talked about 3 overarching things that they talked with school leaders about when it came to keeping their schools safe. And I just thought, since we're on the call, and I believe people will be listening in, wanted to be sharing these. And one was making sure, you talked about building strong relationships with kids, doing things to make sure we're not disenfranchising them, walking the buildings, number 2 here, just to be mindful of our doors closing appropriately. Are they locking the way that they need to be? Are windows shutting up as necessary? And just making sure that the physical plant is in good repair. And then the third one is to be reminding teachers to instruct kids, and teachers to be doing this as well, but don't leave things hidden. If there's concerns of things that they're seeing or hearing, we've got to make sure that school leaders and the appropriate officials are aware of that stuff. Just, you think about the complexity of this all, Tony. I mean, there's just a lot of moving parts and pieces, but we've got to make sure people are engaged and are being intentional with this stuff. Wouldn't you think?
I absolutely agree. And yeah, the piece about if you see something, say something, I think is more important than ever.
Yeah.
And, we really have to encourage everybody to speak up. And I do think this connects in some ways to this question of the bullying and even if you feel like some kids, you're watching it happen, you got to say something about the bullying too,
right? Because
some of what's happened, right, is some of these kids feel like they don't have any other response, and I think we've got to be talking about hey, everybody's got a role here to keep our schools places of inclusion and belonging, and nobody should be pushed out. So,
right, absolutely,
totally support what you said.
Well, so to transition us, Tony, you mentioned the need for resources and whether that be fiscal or otherwise to get this job done. Obviously, it's pretty timely to be having that kind of conversation when you consider the time of year that we're in here with the General Assembly, and obviously we've got the budget making process now in play. You at the state board and the board overall have submitted a recommendation with regards to the budget. So. With you here on the phone, just thought it'd be good to give you an opportunity to kind of speak to what the agency's thinking with that and what your priorities are here in the months to come.
Yeah, Jason, it is very timely. Tomorrow I'll be testifying in both the House and the Senate about our budget that we submitted, and have really the good fortune that Kevin Settle, who's former superintendent of the year in Illinois, and our board member who chairs the Finance and Audit Committee will be testifying with me. And We've had a really good board process to build this budget. Multiple community meetings, budget hearings through the fall, using the new law to really look deeply at what it means to provide resources for all of our districts. And you know this as well as anybody, that now there's a common measure that quantifies adequacy, essentially. The 34 cost factors that are embedded in the law in Illinois now say, hey, if you do these things, these are the largest effect size research-based practices, cross communities for different groups of kids. Like, these are the things that if you're doing, get really good results in lots of different settings. And so now we have a way to talk about what is adequacy, like to be able to do those things, and then the local capacity to meet that. And the thing that really struck us is as we did that research and started to run those numbers, that the deep inequity in Illinois that people have basically known about but haven't had a real way to say that this is the range of inequity. Now we can say that there are districts that are at approximately 46% of adequacy, means they're less than half of what it takes to provide that adequate baseline, all the way to 284%. So they've got almost 3 times, right? So, we've got this way to have a conversation for the first time, because it's in law, about what the gap is. And we, as a board, had multiple conversations in the fall, and then in December, the board directed myself and Robert to build a budget that would say in numbers what our values are, that we believe that no district should be below 90% of adequacy, because the highest need districts get approximately 10% of federal support.
Yeah.
And so we believe that every district in Illinois should be able to provide what is now codified as an adequate education. So that number went from a prior budget request of $6.7 billion to $13.9 billion. And, we still use the state constitution as much as the law, which says that the state has the primary responsibility for financing the system of public education. Totally get that it's a jarring figure. However, now we can have an honest conversation. We believe that the role of the state agency is to say, here's what it takes to meet the needs of all of our kids. And as the public education agency, we should be saying what it takes. And so we are absolutely aware that number is greater than what the state can actually provide right now. Yeah. And we believe it's our role to talk about it and put it out there.
Yeah. Don't you think,
I know
Tony?
That's a lot.
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely. But don't you think that, and this is, I guess, one of the things that I was most excited about with this new funding formula was the type of conversation that we could have around what's really necessary, what's fiscally necessary to adequately educate our kids, right? And we're talking about adequately educate. Think about that term by itself, right? That has its own connotation to it, but at least get to a point of adequacy. So if you're in a district that is at, what'd you say, 46%,
yes,
and still being asked to be held accountable to pretty high expectations, which we want to make sure to do. But, my experience has been is expectations minus resources usually equates to frustration. And my hope is we start seeing similar types of conversations happening locally as the one that you, along with the board members, are trying to drive at the state level.
Yeah, Jason, one of the things that you could say whether you've heard this too, but one of the things over time from superintendents and principals that I hear that talking about that frustration is that, hey, I think we've been our own worst enemies. Like every time they cut us, we find a way to do everything we can. We work around the clock to keep opportunities there for our kids, and seems like they, General Assembly, public, they didn't need the money in the first place. And what they don't see is just the amount of effort and just invisible cost of all those cuts, and that how unfair it is that just based, I was in Crab Orchard, I was in Dupo last week, so Southern Illinois, in districts that are in the mid 50s and 55-ish% adequacy, the kinds of things they're doing and making available to kids, and saying, man, when we had to do these cuts, my staff did this, and this to make sure we didn't lose that for kids. And I mean, it comes out of the adults' well-being when there are that many cuts. And so when we're talking about public systems that would actually create more opportunity in Illinois, it's not a zero-sum game. The more opportunity there is, I think we increase our social and economic outcomes. I think the well-being of the state, the economy grows. Too many people say, oh, the education costs too much. If we're not investing in our young people, that's a recipe for disaster. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of fired up and looking forward to my opportunity to testify tomorrow.
You bet. What could school people be doing, Tony, just to make sure that they're staying informed and supporting getting us to a point of adequacy as we continue to work on this, I'm sure, for several years to come?
Right. I think continuing, and so we thank you to everybody, to all the districts and everybody for submitting data. That's been a really important back and forth and dialogue. And, the tier funding is, we'll send vouchers for the tier funding. So that will start flowing in April, which is essentially the other 5% or so of the money that's appropriated for public education. We got about 95% of it flowing now. But the tier funding, which is critical because this year, full contribution to the tiers actually establishes next year's base funding. Mm-hmm. So continuing to talk about, once we have this built, talking about where a district is in terms of their adequacy and all of what they're doing. And I like you, agree that we should put at the front end of any of our accountability stuff what your local adequacy is, what your capacity target is and where you're at, and everything else is in that context. I don't think it's, to your point, we're not saying we're lowering expectations. It just actually reveals what's really going on. Right. So starting with that, reliance on state funding and where you're positioned, and then having that conversation. So I think we've got to have loud voices. I think educators, this is the time to keep organizing and talking about what's fair and what's necessary for our children.
And I think when you think about what schools have been able to do with the resources that have truly been available to them, I think that actually could cause for celebration, Tony, when you think about what they've been able to pull off, right? Because there has been significant cost related to that.
Man, I agree with you so much, and so much so that and I know we've taken some hits for this, but we're investing in storytelling, and really, we believe that accountability, and this connects to some of the ESSA stuff, that we need to start our accountability system with 852 positive stories. We've got 852 districts in Illinois, all of them doing something to intercede on behalf of children and families, regardless of the amount of resources they have. Mm-hmm. So many things good in Illinois, opportunities created by kids, community outreach, the community service, like every single community, every single school has something positive to tell. And, consistently hearing, well, you guys don't tell your story. So we're getting out there and we're going to be telling a lot of those positive stories. And we believe everybody can get better, right? I mean, there's no single, like the greatest basketball player on the planet, LeBron, talks about he needs coaching, not just his head coach. He needs a personal coach to keep working on things in his game. Yeah. We all got to do that, man. There's no single district, no single school that's the very best it could be right now today, right? And they're doing great things. So two things are true. So we've got to tell those great stories, and we've all got to get better. I mean, it's just the way it is. Yep. So, I think we've got a moment to really celebrate and use that celebration as momentum, right?
Right, absolutely. And so that rolls us into looking at ESSA here, Tony, just to use that as a transition point for us here. So where are we at in terms of a jumping off point into ESSA? Where are we at with implementation right now? And obviously there's a real tie back to the funding formula, right? I mean, we're really talking about what dollars are being used to produce results, what would be strategies or initiatives that we need to be working on in schools to then produce results, and then ESSA to show how we're measuring up. So can you just give us a quick feedback here on what's going on with implementation, the work that's currently in play, and where we're heading with that?
Sure. I think the moment in time when people look back, 20, 30, 40 years from now, August 30th and 31st of 2017 are special days. On the 30th, our state plan was approved by the Department of Education, and on the 31st, evidence-based funding was signed into law in Illinois. And really that many years of advocacy and hard work and partnership to say we need accountability based on real growth and real connections, what's happening in and around schools. We need a common way to talk about supporting schools. And then this longer term piece of actual commitment to funding and building a more fair system of support for districts. Like, all those things are connected. And, Illinois was one of the lead states. We went in early, and so we'd have time during this year to build an accountability system and to build out all the items and to continue the dialogue. And the entire system actually launches August 18 is when the accountability system starts. I just keep talking about it as support and accountability. Our entire plan is organized around capacity building.
Yeah.
So we have been working this entire year with all, being out and about doing the multiple iterations of the plan, and the drafts was not just so we could say we did it. It was so we would build these working groups. And people have continued to work and, submitting items, and the technical advisory committee is working. They'll have that done. Board will vote by June. So everything will be in place. And we have the pilot districts that are working with the Illinois Balanced Accountability Measurement rubric. So that all the baseline activity of actually figuring out how this is all going to work together has been in motion. And I think our ongoing opportunity to, how do I say this, to connect the two, the evidence-based funding and ESSA, is there. They are not officially connected. We have to pay attention to them. But the site-based accounting and site-based expenditure reporting, that is a requirement in the Every Student Succeeds Act. The partnership, the teamwork, everything that's gone on to make that a good plan. We sent guidance out instead of business rules. Like, there's not direction. We're still trying to figure this out. But now we're going to be able to figure out at every single site level, what the expenditures are, site-based expenditures, and that, again, it's not site-based budgeting, it's expenditure reporting.
Right. Well, there are lots of moving parts and pieces here, Tony. I mean, you alluded to several with the Technical Advisory Committee and their work. I know people will be paying attention to that, and you mentioned that by early summer, having a handle on that. We've got the pilot districts working through IBAM and engaging with Illinois Empower. But I know our folks in particular right now, their interest was piqued when the announcement was made regarding Park. And I also know that SAT, we're in the, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, but I believe we're in the last year of their current contract, and so the high school state assessment is going back through the RFP process right now. So, knowing that we're heading into what appears to be the last administration of Park as it currently exists, or our state assessment as it currently exists, do you mind just giving us a little bit of an update on what's happening there and where it appears we may be going?
Absolutely. And in many ways, it does connect to the conversation we're just having about building capacity in the state and really the directions we're going. It's not just a kind of rear-facing, where were we? So the assessment of readiness and what those items are and what they represent. So currently, PARC is the highest rated assessment ever. It's a summative assessment's ability to see where kids are and the items themselves in terms of the least biased and most. The way I talk about it is many of the other assessments that we've used are kind of pre-Google, and these are post-Google. They're not just about rote memorization or, can I compare and contrast some multiple choice. They extend thinking, and you have to use what you know to solve novel or new problems. This ability to have assessment help our kids think and to really answer this question, how ready are they for what's coming? We're going to stay there. I mean, that's the direction we're going. And what's really critical is that we are building our entire system of state accountability on the assessment of readiness. So the last 3 years of assessments, that's the baseline. We put forward an RFP, or request for sealed proposals, that will build on that anchor set of those items. Like we have to be comparable to where we've been. Mm-hmm. And so much of the conversation in Illinois has been, hey, we've got amazing teachers that are building these items. What if they're comparable? Can we use them? The answer's got to be yes. I mean, informed, thoughtful educators building high quality items have to be able to contribute those. In fact, that's Illinois teachers and administrators have been active and have been kind of leads in some way in building a bunch of the PARC items. So the Illinois assessments of readiness is the direction we're going. How we are preparing our kids for what's coming is a conversation we have to keep having. And how do we assess that? We basically said that any kind of new assessment, anybody who bids on this has to be able to say, any assessments given have to be comparable, and how will you figure out that comparability? They have to be built on the anchor set of our prior assessments so we can continue to build forward on our accountability system and tie and align from our earliest learners all the way through high school so that we have a sense of building readiness through the entire system. And, we've been really fortunate. The great work that's happened, the conversation around high school and college admissions with, high school readiness and high school completion and college readiness, the SAT, the Khan Academy, all that support. But you're right. These are conversations that we need to have. Like, we need to keep putting it out there, and we need to keep the folks who are bidding and providing these assessments, they have to keep pushing. They have to keep getting better. And so, before there was, I think, too long a time when there was no competitive bidding on high school assessment. And so, we're back at that. And I think from everything I've heard, the conversation around, hey, we got to be supporting our kids. They have to be getting a free opportunity to take a college admissions is such a powerful equity move. A lot of positive conversation, but you're right. There's a lot in this assessment to talk about.
So, a couple of things here, Tony. First, kind of an editorial comment. Though I'm fully on board with making sure that our vendors out there are staying honest, and I believe that the RFP process sure does that. From just an anecdotal perspective, from what I'm hearing in the field, one, they have appreciated the state board taking care of administrations of the PSAT. That's been extremely helpful. But just generally pleased overall with the support. You mentioned Khan Academy, and there are other things that SAT's been doing at the high school level. I think has been pretty positive overall. But back with a question with PARC, and now looking at a new iteration, and you gave a name, and I missed it, but I think that's probably the name we're going to use moving forward. What's the time frame for that of trying to nail down and get a provider picked or a vendor picked to then look to build this out and get us ready for the years to come?
Well, we're out. The board voted on going out for a new vendor to prepare and create. So this spring we're doing. Essentially, everybody will have the same experience they've had, except, with the feedback and the improvements. And so this spring, everything kind of should look pretty similar. Mm-hmm. And by spring administration of next year, those augmentations and the conversation about what, either local or other assessments connect in, how it's built on that anchor set, how they're aligned, 312, that conversation, that's really now. I mean, we're all in that. We'll be getting bids in through the spring, and that should be known by summer, who was the successful bidder.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. So,
and just to say real quick, so the feedback and the conversation, and the kind of engagement around the state and the leadership, and hey, they're not always easy conversations, and people, some people have said, hey, leave us alone. We know what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Hey, we use this one assessment. We get it back quick. It gives us everything we need. And I've said, look, it's like fast food. Just because you can get it quick doesn't mean it's good for you over time. And, it's not aligned to state standards. They may have a great way to deliver the information, but the information doesn't get you where you need to go. And on the other side, there's folks say, hey, we have great local assessment. Okay, if you make all league locally, you didn't make all state. I mean, there's a different, you got to be having the bigger conversation. If you make all state, you're going to make all American. Like, there are some standards about being ready to play on a much larger stage. And I think that's the conversation I just want to keep people having. It's tough, and not everybody's an assessment expert, and people have anecdotal experiences, but this is one where research really matters, and there are people with expertise in assessment. We got to pay attention to that. And some of our best experts are teachers in classrooms who say, here's what really, when I ask a kid this question, man, they are grinding on it. This has been a great question for me, and we need to hear more of that.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Well, Tony, we're at about a little over 30 minutes in here, and obviously we've covered a lot of ground. As we mentioned before starting the recording, we probably had about 4 podcasts we're trying to jam into one. So I do appreciate your time, and my apologies if we had to skim over a couple of items just to try to keep it all squeezed in here. But as always, thank you for spending a few minutes here with us and talking us through kind of what's happening from your perspective. Obviously, appreciate your thoughts with regards to what's been happening in Florida and how we're trying to work and take leadership here in Illinois with those critical issues. But thanks for your time.
Absolutely, Jason. I really do appreciate the opportunity, and I think just for me in closing, just how important the role of the school principal is to be able to take care of children and families and adults and create a sense of belonging, to really nurture the adult learning as well as the kid learning. I mean, it is one of the more complex roles in any industry, and I think does not get the kind of attention that it deserves. But I just want to say thank you to all the principals for what you're doing to keep our schools pretty extraordinary places in our communities.
Well, we're sure grateful for that. Appreciate having with me here on the phone Dr. Tony Smith, our State Superintendent of Schools here in the state of Illinois. My name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us. Maybe more than a few this time, Tony. This might be one of our longer times on the phone, but obviously really important stuff. If there's anything the IPA can do for you, never hesitate to reach out and give us a call, and you can always find us on the web at www.ilprincipals.org. Take care.